kind of love, it's ever the one I want. I'm lifting you higher, higher. There's nothing that I'd rather do. A sweet elevation.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Poole, Dean of the College of Architecture and Design at the University of Tennessee, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our lecture today. I see in the audience that we not only have our faculty and students, but many of our alumni. Thank you again, alumni, and I hope you join our faculty for an award ceremony that we're having in the A+A building after the lecture at 4 p.m. I also extend a sincere welcome to those of you who traveled from out of town and even from out of the state to hear today's esteemed lecturer. And welcome to all other friends of architecture and design who are in the audience today. Today's lecture is sponsored by General Shale. General Shale stands for quality, innovation, durability, and beauty. And for the College of Architecture and Design, it represents solid and steadfast support. For more than 40 years, General Shale has supported our students through workshops, scholarships, and lectures like this one today. I'd like to take a moment to recognize Josh Brock of General Shale and his wife Keely. Please stand, Josh and Keely. Thank you. And I want to convey our deep appreciation for General Shale's support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Mark Kinzer, who couldn't be here today. He's the Vice President of General Shale, for his unwavering support. The College of Architecture and Design is thrilled to welcome Craig Dykers to Knoxville. As co-founder of Snohetta, Craig is responsible for some of the world's most compelling design work, including the Alexandria Library in Egypt, the Norwegian National Opera and Ballet in Oslo, Norway, the San Francisco Museum of Art expansion, and most recently, last week in fact, the Times Square reconstruction. His work has led to numerous recognitions and awards, including the Mies van der Rohe European Union Prize for Architecture, the World Architecture Prize, and the Aga Khan Award. Full disclosure, I've known Craig for 37 years, from the time we were both classmates at the Little UT in Austin. If I gush a bit about Snohetta, the firm he founded with several partners in 1989, it's because I'm so proud of what my friend has accomplished. This past fall, he was celebrated at the Museum of Modern Art in New York as one of WSJ Plus's Innovators of the Year. In 2013, the Snohetta practice was nominated as one of the top 10 innovative businesses in the world by Fast Company. And he's been the subject of an expose in the New Yorker. And if that wasn't enough, famed chef Thomas Keller recently named Snohetta as number one on the list of 12 things that he can't live without. Craig's story is improbable. Just a few years out of school in the late 1980s, working in Los Angeles, he had a chance meeting with several Norwegian architects. They agreed to collaborate via fax from LA to Oslo on a competition for the modern revival of an ancient library. Winning the international competition, nearly going out of business, resolving the contract, then overseeing the design and construction for over a decade, and finally completing the project in 2002. When Snohetta entered the competition for the library in Alexandria, Egypt, Craig was 27. Construction began when he was 34, and the project was finally completed when he was 41. Throughout, Craig and his colleagues were persistent and patient, and when it was over, they had something of value, something that was really worth waiting for. In the meantime, in Oslo, he and his partners created one of the most forward-thinking architecture and design practices in the world. Their projects are variously described as beautiful, stunning, amazing, incredible, and so on. But their success, I believe, does not come from targeting beauty. Rather, its significance comes from something more simple, ordinary, and profound, connecting people. The top navigation on Snøhetta's website reads, people, projects, people, process, projects, people first. From the unconventional ways that Snøhetta interacts and collaborates in their office, to the unique buildings, landscapes, and city spaces that they design, there's a common thread, closing the gaps that divide people. Together they have created great public places all over the world, places that people cherish and want to return to, that unify rather than divide them, that help them feel good about where they are, that enable multiple layers of society to interact and communicate. Today, Craig is a worldwide ambassador for the value of architecture and design. Through his gifts as an architect and storyteller, he has elevated the perception of what design can do to make the world a better, more beautiful, and especially a more connected place. We're privileged to welcome Craig Dykers to the stage today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thanks. Thank you. It's very special to be here in the Bijou Theater here in Knoxville. It's a great place. I mean, I think it's amazing that Tallulah Bankhead once stood on this stage. That's amazing to me. And I guess a few others too. A great acoustic in the room and a really nice place to be. So thank you. And it's nice to be here in Knoxville again. I've been here a few times before, and I have some friends and even relatives here in the audience. I don't know if there's a Vince and Lori over there. They're my cousins right here in Knoxville. So we are named not after a person. We're named after a place. It's a mountain. This is the mountain in central Norway, Snøhetta. You maybe think you've never heard of this mountain, but you actually have, because inside of Snøhetta is where Valhalla is located in ancient Norse mythology, and probably many of you are familiar with the story of Valhalla, the great palace of the Vikings. And so when people ask me after they meet me, they say, well, it's great to get to know you, and you're very interesting, but when do I get to meet the Snøhetta person? And so we give them directions to this mountain, and hopefully they make it somewhere in central Norway. We have a number of studios. We have two big studios in New York and in Oslo. We also have a couple of other smaller studios in San Francisco and Singapore, and a pretty good size studio in Innsbruck. All of these studios are somewhat autonomous. They're self-sustaining, and they held together by the culture of Snøhetta that we create as a company. As mentioned by Scott, our first commission, which I received when I was 28, was the revival of the Great Library of Alexandria in Egypt, a library that stood within Western mythology as one of the greatest centers of knowledge throughout Western culture. It disappeared. Nobody quite knows how. Some people think it burned down. That's probably a part of the reason why it disappeared. But it has been gone, except for its knowledge, which extends into many parts of our society today. But the structure itself has disappeared, and nobody knew what it looked like. So we were tasked with the idea of bringing this thing back to life and building it on the coast of Alexandria, where Alexander the Great founded this city, and that Homer wrote about in the Iliad and the Odyssey over 17,000 years ago. Well, he didn't write about it 17,000 years ago, but the city existed 17,000 years ago. Sorry, I'm a little groggy. I've got a bit of a cold, so please forgive me if I mispronounce my name or something. We'll see how it goes. When we finished the Alexandria Library, we were quite excited, and about 9 years after we finished it, it was receiving a great number of visitors, about 12,000 visitors a day. And then came the Arab Spring in 2011. And the first images that were sent to us were pictures like this of smoke and burning and rioting in the streets. If you remember, at that time it was fairly challenging in Egypt. Over 200 people died in the streets of Alexandria, less than 200 yards from the library, because actually the library is where the first intellectual discussions started to develop democracy in Egypt, and then it moved from there to Cairo, the streets of Cairo. When we saw these images, which were just kind of posted on the internet or sent by friends, we thought, oh my God, the library, which is exactly sort of right behind these buildings where the smoke is coming from, we thought it's going to get burned down again. Fortunately, it wasn't damaged at all, and in fact, the next set of pictures that we got were these, where people, citizens of the city and students at the university formed a human chain around the library to protect it from the riots and from damage. What's amazing to me is that these people represented both anti-government and pro-government forces. So they set their politics to the side to protect this building from damage and to foresee a change in identity for the country, and that the library would be a part of that new identity. So that was a rather special gift for us. The building somehow reached a maturity as we watched the city around it in terrible turmoil. We sent someone back about 6 months ago to Alexandria. It's been around 15 years since the library opened, and so it's open now as long as it took us to design and build it. So it was an interesting turning point. Some 30 years had passed. What we found was also terribly optimistic and hopeful. First of all, the library is an institution that represents gender equality unlike any other in the region. So over 50% of the staff are female. When we began the project, this would have been unthinkable. Maybe 25% of the staff might have been female. They've expanded the Young People's Library from 200 seats to 600 seats, and young women are given the opportunity to learn in a very direct way that they hadn't been able to before. So this picture was taken by the person that was down there from our office, and it's the young women looking at the model, the architecture model, and so they're seeing perhaps the fact that they too could be an architect one day, which again was quite unusual, and we were happy that it's grown in this way. Another thing that happened was about 8 months ago, they lit the roof of the library pink in commemoration of breast cancer awareness. And I remember when we started the project in Egypt, if I were to have said the word breast, I might have been thrown in jail. I mean, it was just unheard of that you would even mention such a thing. And now they're using the roof of the building to bring awareness of breast cancer to the citizens of the region. So it's been fascinating to watch it change over the years. And I'm not really talking about that project now because it's been so long, but you can find a lot about it in magazines and so forth, and books, other things. That library brought us to a number of new library projects. In fact, one of them is not too far from here in North Carolina, in Raleigh, which we did together with some of my colleagues, one of whom is here, Richard Fort, somewhere out there in North Carolina. And this was a project which was meant to create a new identity for a campus that had been relatively conservative in how it understood architecture, and certainly conservative in what it was library was thought to be. So this new building, this new library became a window onto the world for the university, and of course the world's window into the campus itself. The building has a very gentle facade made of solar fins, so it's very low technology. And one of the things I enjoy about this image is that in the night and even in the day, the fins reflect light in a very particular manner. So very soft kind of bleeding light coming through these fins. And this is a very, very soft line. And I often tell architecture students, it's very difficult for an architect to make a soft line. We make hard lines all the time, certainly straight lines. And occasionally we'll take a straight line and we'll kind of curve it. And we'll say, well, it's curved, therefore it's soft. It's not. A curved line is simply a straight line that's been bent into a curve. It's not ephemeral. It doesn't have a kind of life or a time to it. In this particular case, this shape, this line is changing all the time. So you're always reinterpreting what the line means. And I think this is a challenge for us as architects to understand the value of ephemeral qualities in life and the fact that not everything has to be so clear and identifiable or kind of messed up in a very predictable way. Inside the building, it has some very unusual features. There's a great staircase, yellow staircase, that runs all the way from the bottom to the top of the building. It's a 5-story building, and we made sure that we made all the staircases just exciting and dynamic and really fun to be on. And then we put the elevators a little further away, you know, and they're in a kind of gray area. So it's really funny to me when I watch people come into the building. You know, they'll come to the stair, and like most people, as you probably know, this is the barbecue belt, so everybody's like, let's just take the elevator. Sorry, but it's kind of true. So we got to get people off the elevators. I mean, in my hotel, the elevator goes up 2 floors, and everybody takes it. So so people will walk past the stair, and they'll go, no, I think I'll go to the elevator. But the elevator is exactly like 35 feet away. And about halfway, they'll go, no, I don't really want to go to the elevator, and they'll go back and take the stair. And once they're on the stair, they've committed. And we've made the first stair very small. It's yellow because it's very energetic. Yellow is a color that gets you going. And as soon as people commit to the stair, they really enjoy it. So there are people that I've talked to in this building that have gone through all 5 flights, all 5 stories. They've been going to university there for 4 years, and they've never used the elevator in the building. So I think this is an interesting commitment to moving people through space, because you have to be able to move in order to think. I often say that if you're only thinking with your brain, you're not really thinking. You have to think with your whole body. Your whole body is a part of a process of thought. In fact, just for your information, we have just as many neural cells in our digestive system and in our torso as a small dog has in its brain. So we have a full set of neural cells that are used when we move, and this is why being active is very important, and buildings can help us become more active. Another unusual character of the building is this very strange thing on the right. It's a book robot, sometimes referred to as the book bot. So there are 2 million books in this building that are housed on these little shelves, metal shelves, and they're accessed via a robot. And you'd think, well, God, that sounds horrifying. It's like the future is here and I'm dead. But actually, it's quite interesting. Many books in libraries now aren't checked out very often. It's only a fairly small percentage of books that are checked out. So in order to save space for people, we put the books in this compact system that the robot manages. If you need a book, you can go online, and like Amazon or something like that commercial, you can see the spine of the book. You can open the book up. You can read it. It's like it's a real book. It's not just a line of code. And you ask the robot to go get it for you, and you can get a book in about 10 minutes. And what's fun is that on the left here, you can see these little windows. People love to go to those windows and watch the robot go get books, so much so that they put in an interactive screen here, and you can go up to that screen and just tell the robot, bring me a random book. And every one of the robots, there are 5 of them, they all have names, like Bob and Jane and Sally, and they all go to see Sally go get the book, and when it goes get the book, the lights get kind of dark, and it's very exciting, and then it gets this thing, and if the book hasn't been checked out for more than 5 years, the computer screens in the library freeze, and they say, this book, so-and-so, has just been checked out, first time in 5 years. Isn't that amazing? And everybody stops and reads the title, and they write it down, and actually it's increased book circulation a bit because people are seeing these books being checked out for the first time in many years. So there's an unusual quality to interaction. There's a lot of stuff down here. I'm just going to, wow, some cables. When you get to the top of the building, there's a beautiful balcony that overlooks the Great Smoky Mountains and the countryside in the distance, and of course the middle central North Carolina landscape. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but you are blessed with some of the most beautiful landscape in the world here in this part of the country. So to get up there on top of the building and look out and see it is quite special. So the students often work their way all the way to the top just to get to the spot. And they take the stairs, and it makes them feel somehow connected to who they're sitting with or next to. Another building that has similar ideas embedded in it that you may have seen is the National Ballet and Opera in Oslo, Norway. That is now finished, I guess, for about 10 years, or probably 9 years. One of the interesting features of this building is the rooftop, which ramps up from the fjord of Oslo, all the way up over the top of the theater, and gives you a view over the surrounding city and the surrounding countryside. It's all a series of ramps. So when you approach the building, you see all these ramps, and you may not know it, but your body sort of reacts to that subconsciously. So you start to change your feeling of weight inside your body. And seeing something like that already prepares you for being active onto the structure itself. So people love to walk up to the rooftop of this building. They get a view of the city that they wouldn't have otherwise. We have a great many events that occur on the roof, and it's been now a new sort of public space inside the city of Oslo. Inside the building, there's a rather traditional room, very similar to the room that we're in today here in the Bijou. It's a horseshoe-shaped room, all made for live acoustics, and it houses both ballet and opera. Sometimes they have performances outside. This was an amazing performance of Carmen inside. The Carmen was performed live. They only have 1,300 seats. They couldn't sell enough tickets. Everybody loves to see Carmen. It's super sexy, so let's go see Carmen. And there was such pressure to see the show, they simulcast it outside on a cold winter day. You can see everyone's all dressed up. So there were 3,000 people outside watching Carmen simulcast while 1,300 inside watched it. It was really quite fascinating. It wasn't the biggest performance on the roof. The biggest one was when Justin Bieber was there, and we had 35,000 crying teenagers on the roof of the building. I don't think I'll ever be able to have that said again. I had that many crying teenagers. There are a number of places to perform inside the building, in the lobby. This is an area adjacent to the toilets, which we had worked with Olafur Eliasson to create the sculptural work that clads the toilets. We like to say we have some of the world's most artistically designed toilets. And as you go outside, you're able to walk down the roof, right down the ramp, right into the water. So as you likely know, most cities today, if they're anywhere close to water, you're usually disconnected from it. So there's a walk, a river walk or something, but usually a drop of several feet to get down to the water. And so our connection to nature is gradually being removed. And so we wanted to reconnect. You can actually get right down into the water here. And after we did this project, we cleaned up 60,000 tons of raw pollutants that were in the fjord from the industrialized era that existed here for over a century. So there were heavy metals and methane gas, and we cleaned all of that out to make this building. And the result is that flora and fauna have returned to the Oslo fjord, including these two beautiful swans that now are there almost all the time. I guarantee if you were to go see this building, you would very likely see these two swans or two very similar swans nearby. So there's a lot of interesting natural wildlife occurring here, including strange human creatures like this one, which is just out there doing something strange. When we finished the building, we were super excited about it, and we stayed up all night to read the first reviews, the critics, to see if they liked the acoustics, the sight lines, the performance, the theater. And shockingly, the first headline to hit the internet was this, which in Norwegian translates to "Couple Caught Having Sex on Roof of Opera During Opening." So unknown to us, while we were sitting there with kings and queens and presidents and premiers, there was a couple consummating the building on the roof immediately over our head. They were politely asked to finish their activities elsewhere, apparently. But now I think it's some kind of a club. So there's like on the internet, if you've had sex on the roof of the opera, you can put your name there. At first I was kind of horrified, like, oh my God, is this really what is our headline? And after some reflection, I thought, well, maybe that's not so bad after all. A lot of people gave us film pictures and films and film clips, and now with YouTube and things like that, there's a lot of film clip things out there. Before those were well known, people would send us film clips. So the next slide, and hopefully the volume will work, it's a kind of musical piece, is a film clip that was sent to us at random after the building opened. Wow. Okay, so this is completely illegal. Don't try this. It's a kind of a motorcycle daredevil. Wow. So nobody knew that he was going to do this. It was just kind of a guerrilla activity. Or did he get in trouble? The police came very shortly. There's the police. And then he took off. Wow, it was amazing. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, so if any of you were here getting AIA points, you just lost all your credits watching that film. I stopped it here. The film actually goes on. He kept riding his motorcycle on the building and many other ways. I stopped it because of that really strange car there, which is actually Norway's first electric car that somehow was in the background there. And we actually helped design the advertising for this car some years later. But it was quite fascinating to see how people react to the building in different ways. And that theater brought us to a number of other theater projects. This one is one of the more recent theaters we've designed in Canada, in eastern Canada, in Ontario, near Ottawa, in Quebec. It's situated on Lake Ontario, and that's the view from the lobby during winter. Isn't that fantastic? That's frozen Lake Ontario. As far as you can see, it's ice. It's a special place to be. When you're there in the winter, you can walk out on the ice and look back at the building. It's actually a renovation of an existing stone structure that was there since 1905 with an expansion that is a newer structure. It was historically protected and landmarked the site, so we had to be very careful how we worked with the project. But probably the most important feature of the building is the interior hall, which is asymmetrical and lined with 4 types of wood, all from eastern Ontario. And everything in this space is designed for live acoustics. So there are some speakers there. The speakers are only used for speech. So they were just down for testing. But actually you don't need those speakers at all. They can be removed completely for music. So the room seats about 550 people, and you can have everything from a single soloist to a 70-seat orchestra. And it works without any electroacoustics whatsoever. Probably not dissimilar to this great room, the Bijou, which has excellent acoustics. Really, I'm only mic'd because I'm speaking, but probably if you had a great instrument here, you wouldn't really need too much acoustical support. And so that was a wonderful thing to work on, something that just doesn't require electricity. And then after that, we started to work on some museum projects. This is perhaps one of the more well-known in the United States, the National September 11th Memorial Museum in New York City at the location of the tragedies of the destruction of those 2 towers and the terrorist attacks in 2001. Our building is the smallest building at the World Trade Center site. It's this building here. These are all office buildings that line the edges that you may have seen pictures of. And our building was the only building that was situated on the memorial where the World Trade Center towers once stood. Now those towers are fountains for commemoration and memory. The building has a quality of being very low and horizontal and very intimate. So in New York City, we often say that intimacy is a luxury. It's very hard to find intimacy in that city. And certainly if you're single and looking for a date, you would agree with me. New York City is a jungle for the dating world, but it's a jungle on so many other levels. So we tried to make the building delicate, approachable, visible in your cone of vision. It's one of the few buildings that's actually horizontal in this area, and it reflects light in unique ways. So as you move around the building, it's always showing you daylight and ambient light in a unique fashion, depending on the time of day that you're there. This facade is the north-facing facade of the building, so there's no direct natural sunlight on this facade, yet it's projecting light as though it were light were shining on it. That's because the facade has very tiny little scratches in it that collects the ambient light and projects it back out. No matter where it is, it focuses the light in a very unique way. So as you move around the building, you're always seeing it in a different way. From inside the building, there's a great atrium that brings daylight down into the museum below the ground. And in that atrium are 2 magnificent columns that were rescued during the cleanup effort of the 2 original towers that were fallen on September 11th. And they sit against the windows of the atrium. And then distance just behind is the new World Trade Center tower that was just finished a few years ago. So you have the effect of seeing time in juxtaposition with architecture and structure. One of the wonderful components of the building is how people like to look at their reflections in the glass. And one day I was there and I was going down the stairs and I looked up and I saw this young girl and she's seeing herself in the glass and she's dancing and smiling and her mother is behind her taking a picture. And if you notice, she's not taking a picture of her daughter. She's actually taking a picture of her daughter's reflection in the glass, which is kind of a magnificent idea that the daughter's projecting herself into this glass, and the mother is receiving that projection. And she's smiling, and I remember when we started in the cleanup effort at the World Trade Center site so many years ago, it was dust and calamity and trauma, and if those of you that are too young to remember it probably can't understand how difficult it was to be in New York at that time, and really in the United States and anywhere in the world. And when we made the project initially, we said, if we could just bring one smile to this place of so much tragedy, then we will have done our job, because the memorials are about the past and they're about the loss of life. And the commercial towers are about the future, they're about optimism, they're about things that we don't quite understand, but they keep the economy going. And then there's this little building with your own reflection in it. And as soon as you see yourself in the building, you recognize that you're alive in this moment in time. And once that moment is gone, it's gone forever. And so we need to rejoice in each moment that we're alive. And the buildings had that effect in a very interesting way. So here comes a picture that it makes sense that it's after the last picture, but you might be surprised to see it in an architecture lecture. I see pictures like this from time to time in the newspaper. Most of us do. There's a lot of polarization in our society, a lot of division. Diversity has created challenges within social structures and cultural structures in our world. And when we see pictures like this, we often look at it and we'll start blaming people. We'll say, well, clearly the guy with the hat was an idiot and he said something and the other guy hit him. Or clearly the guy with the short sleeve white shirt on is just an angry, grumpy guy and he hit the other one for God knows why. Or you'll say, well, it's obviously the politicians who created some kind of political movement that made something like this happen. We just go down the list and we blame every single person except for ourselves, because we're not in the picture, but we're just one of those people actually. And if you're an architect, you definitely don't blame yourself. Like, what does an architect have to do with this picture? Well, the fact is, if you look around, everything that frames this picture, the stairs, the plaza, the building, the street lights, every single thing that is in this space that frames this event was designed by an architect or a designer. So we create the spaces where things like this happen. And there is clearly an effect on us by the things that we make. And of course, Marshall McLuhan understood this very well when he said, the environments we create becomes our medium for defining our role in it. So think of it this way. If you've ever been to a zoo and you've seen a sad, lonely zoo, and it's a bad cage, say, for a polar bear, and the poor polar bear is in there walking back and forth, and it's licking its fur till it bleeds, self-destructing itself, it's aggressive, it doesn't eat properly, it looks emaciated. All of that is because this polar bear was stuck into a zoo cage that wasn't natural for its living conditions. If you were to take that same bear and put it in a more graceful, more open, more natural condition, it would probably lose most of its traumatic condition. So if that's the case, then we are essentially like polar bears. We're making our own zoo. Everything that we design is our zoo. This building, this room, the lights, the streets outside, it's our own zoo cage, and we're designing it. And if we don't design it properly, we're going to be just like that bear, getting very aggressive, mistreating ourselves, becoming unhealthy, and not able to function in a natural society. So take this to heart. It's very important, especially in the time that we live in, where you can freely walk into a store and, buy a gun, but apparently you can't smoke a cigarette. That's unhealthy, but buying a gun is healthy. So there's a lot of challenges that we face in our world that we have to address also as architects. So sometimes I say we don't just design buildings or design things, objects. We design habitat. We have to understand that everything we do is a part of a habitat that exists around us and frames our lives. Most of us, when we think of habitat, we think of the idea of biology. We all understand that kind of thing. Living organisms, plants, birds, bees, organisms, bacteria, all the stuff that we normally think of as sort of the biology of the world. Well, that's one kind of habitat, but it's not the entire picture. Biotic habitat is only half of our world. The other is abiotic habitat. In other words, things that aren't actually alive. So bits of rock, soil without any living creatures in it, water without life, or air for that matter, These things, when you extract all the biotic components of them, like a rock that's just a mineral, is a part of our habitat. And it's the interaction between these non-living things and these living things that creates the world that we live in. We tend to shove off all the biology stuff to the scientists, and we tend as architects to think about just the hard stuff, but actually the two together are very, very important. So how can that have a relevance to how we understand architecture? Well, when I was in school, and it's, I believe, a little bit true today still, that when we're taught architecture, we're taught about architectural theories. We're taught about formal theories, how to make form, how to create shapes that people will try to better understand. And even if you're not an architect and you know about architecture, generally your information is limited to what it looks like. Wow, that's an amazing looking building. Or, you know, if you're an architecture student, I made this kind of shape that wraps in on itself and does one of these. And you look at all of those things and you go, what is the consequence of that? The fact is that all of these things that we make are essentially having to be dealt with by people. So the formal theory related to objects must also be translated to a theory about people. We have to understand who we are, why we do what we do, the weird eccentricities of what it means to be a human being. I mean, I often say, you know, I don't know about you, but when I look in the mirror and I'm naked, I'm like, wow, that is a weird looking thing. Like, I can't believe this is me. You know, it's like there's all this kind of extra fat over here, and, you know, it's just not a pleasant sight. So, so you know, we're strange creatures. We're weird, fleshy blobs. We do stupid things. We pretend that we're smart. We pretend that we're civilized. We wish the world were perfect. It will never be perfect. I hate to break it to you. You know, and in some way we have to understand all of these odd sides of who we are. Sometimes I say that the world in terms of architecture is divided into two groups. They're the architects who have to straighten everything up, like put everything in a line, make all the walls straight, make everything where it's supposed to be. And that's one group. And then the other group are architects who are just trying to shake everything up. Like, okay, I'm going to mess up all these lines, and I'm going to make all these weird axes, and I'm going to make all these blobs. So you've got these two worlds, straightening it up and shaking it up. And I sort of feel somewhere in the middle, like I don't really care. I just want it to be about me, and I want it to be about you. And whatever route that takes, that's the route that I'm going to follow. Well, we've tried to learn about habitat a lot in our office. And one day we started to realize there was terrible destruction in bee habitat in the world, and probably you're familiar with this, certainly during the allergy season here in Knoxville, you know how important the flowers are, and also food growth to our life. And bees are one of the most important characters in managing our food supply as human beings, and they're disappearing at an alarming rate. Some of this has to do with chemicals, and well, the only way we can change that is to fix the companies that deal with the chemicals. But also it has to do with the habitat for bees, and they're losing habitat to live naturally. Most bees that you see, especially bumblebees, the humble bumblebee, is in a domesticated lifestyle. So basically they live in little white boxes, and they make their honey inside there, and a few times a day a human being will take the top of it off with a smoke canister, smoke this like drug smoke in there, and they all kind of like that, and they just pass out. And then they get all their honey taken away from them. It's put back in, and 10 minutes later they wake up and go, wow, what the hell just happened? You know, I've lost all my babies, like all 10,000 of them, and all the honey. You know, it's an extreme habitat to be domesticated bee. So we decided to try and work with this idea. So we designed some beehives. We did this just sort of, nobody asked us to. And we wanted to put up beehives just in all kinds of locations around so that bees would have a habitat that wasn't for domesticating honey. We knew that if we did that, if it was an ugly beehive, nobody would want it. So we had to make super sexy beehives so they'd say, yeah, I want one of those, even if it has bees in it. So this was the first one that was installed on the rooftop of a little building in Oslo. It's some of our smallest clients there. And these two little beehives, they can run for about 6 years before you really have to clean them out. In a natural world, a bee would occupy space, and then eventually its poop and everything fills up so much they have to leave. But in this case, you can clean it out when you need to, and they'll stay. So once you get it going after the first year or so, it runs on its own, and you don't have to do anything. We designed the hives after the natural form of some of the hives that we had seen and studied. and we took a great deal of care in understanding exactly what a bee needs. Another similar project was based on birds. I always find it amazing. We all love birds. We're inspired by birds, and we're so inspired by them that even in traditional architecture, I'm sure somewhere like on this building, if we look long enough, we'll find a little statue or an ornament of a bird. So we'll put bronze birds on buildings, we'll put stone birds on buildings, but if an actual bird is to make a nest on a building, we basically shoot it. You know, like a real bird, out of the question. Only bronze birds on my building. And so all the buildings that we make displace all of this life that used to be in the area where the buildings once were. In fact, you could, at a certain level, say that architecture is a blight on nature. A friend of mine's a graffiti artist, and he was talking to me the other day, and he said, he used to get in trouble for graffitiing buildings because he said you're destroying the buildings. The architecture is what they told him. He said, well, isn't the buildings destroying nature? Everybody's destroying something. So we have to figure out a way how to deal with that. So in this case, we thought maybe we could make something that would reinstall habitat for bird and fauna life in buildings. So we made this insert that would be inserted into a masonry structure, and it has a series of rings on it. And depending on the kind of bird that you want in it, you pull off the layers so that the right-sized bird can nest inside of your wall on your building and not cause any damage to the structure. It's really funny. If you ever ask an architect to design a birdhouse, you'll get things that look like, I don't know, the Statue of Liberty or God knows what. They will have never once thought about what an actual bird really needs. So they're like looking at red and yellow stripes and all these kinds of shapes. But actually what the birds need is just as beautiful as anything you could ever dream up. And so the form that you see here is a direct reaction to how the birds nest. One of the ideas was that if you inserted these into a wall, like a CMU wall, you could rotate the CMU, the block, and put a one-way mirror on the inside surface so you could look in and see the birds nesting, but they couldn't see you because it was reflective on the other side. So we're starting to try and build these now. That's the other small client that we had for this project. And another project having to do with animal life and also the relationship of animal life to human life was a very well-known project that we made in northern Norway at the foot of the mountain Snøhetta that we're named after. This valley is known for the rare condition that wild reindeer migrate through here once a year. And so the migration of the wild reindeer is so special. People like to go out and watch these reindeer in the valley. But of course, all the noise and the smell and everything affects the reindeer, and so they get nervous with all the people watching them. So we created a observatory where people could be inside, stay warm and comfortable, and not disturb the reindeer. These are the areas of wild reindeer habitat in the northern parts of our hemisphere. So the structure itself is very simple. It's a metal box with a big glass wall and a rather amazing wooden bench, which is made of solid wood, which was CNC carved by a robotic creature that was able to make these shapes for us in full scale. One thing you'll notice is that there are these funny flanges here, and you might say to yourself, that seems a little out of character. That's because they weren't in the original design. So what happened was after we built this thing, it turns out that unknown to us, there's a lot of muskox that live in the area. I don't know if you've ever seen a muskox. They're kind of like little buffaloes, and they're kind of cute looking, but also pretty scary. And the males are very, very, very territorial. And the way we had designed it was that such that the glass was too low to the ground, and the male muskox would see their reflection in it and charge and smash their head against the glass. And it nearly broke the glass. And we were like, geez, I can't believe that was not on the list of things to check, muskox attacks. We had to clear out the ground so that the muskox can't be high enough. But first we had to strengthen the glass just in case. But now the muskox don't see their reflection in the glass anymore. But nevertheless, despite the fact that they can't see themselves, they still hang around the building. Like it's been 2 years after the last muskox saw their reflection, and they seem to be like still going there for that magnificent muskox in the sky that might return one day. So they just live there sometimes in the winter in this very unusual structure. And we also go there, so since it's at Snøhetta, this little observatory, our office takes a trip there about once every 2 years. We climb up the mountain. You can't take yourself seriously if you name yourself after a mountain and don't actually climb it. So we climb it, and then we come down, we get a bunch of schnapps and have a big party. It's a lot of fun. Another unusual project related to habitat I wanted to share with you is our most recent project, and in my mind, our most interesting project at the moment. It's the reconstruction of a waterfall in Oregon. You've probably all heard of the Willamette River Valley. A lot of wine comes from there. It's a beautiful river, and it has a beautiful waterfall, or had a beautiful waterfall about 100 years ago. But over the years, industrialization has taken over, and there were a series of factories and hydroelectric dams, and they have occupied the edges of this waterfall such that the water barely runs anymore. It's almost impossible to actually see the water. This is one of the rare occasions that the water is running. But for the most part, it's still understood. Well, I guess I should say, let me go back a slide. So to give you some context, the water used to run not only here on these rocks, but all the way along this edge, right down, right off this picture down to somewhere here, and all the way along this edge. It's the second largest waterfall by volume behind Niagara Falls in the United States. And now it's just a little trickle, a little trickle there. The Native Americans that live there still worship the waterfall. It's sacred to the 8 or 9 tribes that live there. They still, what is called fish for lamprey. I don't know if fishing is the right word, because basically they stand under the water, and the lamprey, which are kind of an eel, are trying to get up or falling over, and they reach out with their hands, the natives, the First Nations people, and they just grab the lamprey and then throw it in a bag on their waist. And they'll catch like 15, 20 of these things in about an hour. So it's rather amazing to watch. You can see here, it's been a leisure place for fishing. Here's the waterfall in more ordinary conditions, where it's mostly just the rock exposed. And you can see the water used to go all the way to that bridge and all the way along here, and all the water was diverted. All of these industries that were here are now empty. So they've all moved out. None of this industry exists anymore. There are no longer paper mills. There's no longer wool mills. The hydroelectric plant barely functions. So all of these buildings are empty, and you can't get to the water. And so it's a kind of a tragedy. So we've been asked to try and reinvigorate the waterfall and bring it back to life. But we can't just eliminate everything, because there are some people who are saying, just knock down all that garbage and bring it back to what it was. We want a beautiful waterfall again because we're habitat enthusiasts. But then there are people whose grandparents worked in these buildings, and they're like, I don't want to tear that building down. That's my family history. And then there are kayak people who say, like, I don't care what you do. I just want to have a water world theme park. So everybody is coming in to this site with their own ideas. What we're doing is we're leaving key buildings. So we've had to register every single building, which is empty and unused. And some of them are dangerous or are going to fall down, so we're taking them away. And we're leaving some of the exceptional ones and some of the masonry ones. And we're going to try and re-expose the natural habitat. So what we found was that if this is all the area that's been built up by industry, we found after looking at it that most of this is built on piles. So when we were climbing around underneath these structures, we saw that the original landscape is still underneath it all. It was amazing. They didn't dynamite it or just pour concrete over it. And so we thought what you could do is remove some portions of this and re-expose the rock like this in different locations and let the water flow again. What's intriguing is that some of these buildings are now built below the flood line, so that once you let the water flow again, the ground floors of all these buildings will flood, very likely once a year. So we're designing them so that the ground floors can flood, and that can be a part of the experience of visiting this place. So here, for example, is one area where we're going to peel back the concrete, basically expose it into something like this. And we'll build little bridges that take you back and forth, and we'll let the water run through and back along the edges so that the water will run again. We're registering flora that are growing on the surfaces of all of these buildings and trying to also create new habitat for the plants that used to exist in this area, as well as the wildlife that swims upstream in the Willamette. In order to make it work, we need to make it exciting for people, because people won't pay for stuff unless it's exciting. So we're making things, ways to get through these old buildings. We're knocking walls out so you can walk right to the edge and look down and see the waterfalls. And then in order for it to work, we have to build with like giant saws. We're going to cut through the concrete and create a habitat for flora higher enough up that the people can't mess with it. In some areas, we're cutting through the tops of the buildings and building new nesting grounds on the top. We've built a calendar that shows the cycle of animal and plant life throughout the year. And we've found a way in which you can make it festivals there, super exciting festivals for people and drinking and food and everything. And they're in the times of year when various plants and animals are not mating or migrating, so that throughout the year it's calendared so that everybody gets the benefit of the place, including the living creatures that have nothing to do with us. Some of them, when they flood, you'll walk over bridges and look down, and the water will reflect up onto the ceilings. So in this case, we've cut an oculus in the top of the structure, and that's sunlight coming down under these surfaces. So we're in concept design right now, and it's moving along pretty well. Here's a tiny little project. I'm showing you some fun little small projects. This is in San Francisco, and somebody gave us the commission to make a little parking lot park. You've probably heard of those here in Knoxville. They might have had some. Just take a parking space or a place on the sidewalk and make it a park for a week or so. So our idea was to make a rocking garden. So it's a grass garden, and you sit on it and you can rock. It's got a surface underneath. We actually grew the grass and in the soil in our studio in San Francisco. So for 4 weeks we had all these ultraviolet lights, and we had to clear the whole studio out. The hardest thing about this was that one of the studio people had a dog, and that dog so badly wanted to piss on that grass. It was just constantly trying to pull the dog off the grass. But we kept the dog away, and we actually grew the grass, and then we put it out on the sidewalk. It was there for a week. Kids really loved it because it kind of moved back and forth. It was very soft to sit in, so it introduced this kind of softness to the hardscape that we're so accustomed to in downtown areas. Another unusual project, and since we saw a child in that last image, it's always fun to work with young people and children. They're so much more random and relaxed than adults. And so in this particular case, the Swarovski Crystal Company in Austria asked us to make a community center for all the people who work in their factory. Originally, it was meant to be a fairly large building for the adults, the people that worked in the building, and then off to the side was going to be a very small little thing for the adults who bring their kids to community events. They could go off to the side and play. But we reversed the order, so we put the adults in this little thing, and we gave the kids this 5-story tower. So this is a 5-story play tower just for kids. They can climb up through it. On each floor there's a different trampoline. It's got amazing views, and it's just a great place for the young folks to be. Even the architects, this is one of the architects doing the punch list on the project to see if it actually all functioned properly. But it's amazing views up there, and I guess it's because it's Austrian kids. They're not afraid of heights, so these view of the mountains didn't frighten them, and it's been pretty successful. Another unusual little project, and I'm showing you lots of odd little things because generally people just talk about the big stuff. This was a little pavilion that we made for a light festival in Singapore. The light festival only exists for 2 weeks, and normally you get all these rather verbose, grandiose pavilions, and they have champagne and stuff in them, and somebody shows off their lights. And then it's taken down after 2 weeks, and God knows what happens to it. So we took an approach where we wanted everything in the pavilion to be used again, so that once the pavilion was taken down, everything can be disassembled. So the main component of it is this light umbrella, and it shines light down onto a space where people like to play and sit and talk. And each one of those lights that you see is a solar-powered light system. So basically, one lamp has a solar panel generator on the top, and during the day it collects the sun, and then at night it lets out light. So each one of these could be taken down and shipped to a different location where in the countryside where people don't have electricity. There's a lot of people in Malaysia and in the areas around Singapore that actually don't have access to power, and they have to get to their water, their wells, and these things. So these could be all just redistributed, and the wood structure, which is bamboo and wood, could also be used to make other structures with. So people started sending us images. We've gotten a lot of images back from the region. This is a young boy who's going down to get water the little garden that's for their family, and he's got one of the little lights there, and they use it at night to go down and get water. So has been pretty successful. We've heard quite a lot of them are still being used. I would like to talk a little bit about our office. I'm talking a lot about studio habitat, but we have our own habitat, the habitat of our studio. I often say, if you talk to an architect about their political beliefs, most architects are generally kind of left-leaning, progressive people. They're like, yeah, we like society, and we like all kinds of people, and we want the public realm and everything. And then you walk into their office, they're the most hierarchical, structured places you've ever been in your life. Like there's a boss at the top and this army of slaves doing all their work. And, it would make the Vatican blush if they saw how most architecture studios were organized. So, why is that? How can we say one thing and then live in a very, very different way? So in our office, we've tried to take over and tried a few different things. One thing is that we're not just architects. We're about 30% landscape architects. We have interior architects, branding and graphic designers, and other people working together. We try really hard to keep a balance of 50% male, female. It's difficult in our industry. But if keeping male-female balance is difficult, that is nothing compared to ethnic balance. The ethnic balance in our office is atrocious, and it's like that in most architecture offices. So we only have about 17% minorities, although about 30% of our leadership are ethnic minorities. We are very proud that we have 14% left-handers in our office, so that's like a big deal. I don't know any of you left-handers out there, but we got your back. And I think all of this makes for an interesting office. We get very physical. We're always making things together. We're constantly making stuff. And I like this picture because this is even an intern. This person here, an intern from Mexico. Actually, that's someone here who was talking about Ian tonight. He used to go to school in Blacksburg. That's him. So they're making a model together. It's hard enough to just get people to sit and talk together, but to get them to actually make a model together is quite an achievement. So we really work hard to make that kind of an atmosphere. One of the things that makes that possible is that we installed a beer tap into our studio. So it's not easy to get people to do things together. So we put in this beer tap, and it was great. It was a little embarrassing, so we put a fruit bowl out in front of it afterwards, so we would look a little bit healthy. But actually, the beer tap is probably the center of attention. Next to that space is a place where we can all get together, and we work together and we eat together. So we eat. We don't have enclosed enclosed meeting rooms. We have one giant room which is attached to the beer tap. And everybody works at that, and they also eat lunch together. So we eat lunch together, and we work at the same space. It allows us in this room to come together and talk about different things. There aren't separate meetings going on in separate rooms. This is, in this picture, several projects going on at once. So the acoustics are very important. So you control the acoustics. You can have a lot happening in a single space. And here's a sort of time lapse of, this is our Oslo office. So here's some of the tables. We sit there, we work on them in the morning. Then it's suddenly lunchtime. They come out, people start to set up lunch. Then everybody eats, and we're all eating at the same table. And then eventually food is over, there's a few stragglers, and then we go back to work. And so you get to sit next to other people that are working on different jobs than you might be working on. It's an important idea to eat and meet together. So now I'm going to show you a few more projects in detail. This was one that we recently opened. It's the Ryerson Student Center in Toronto. It's an unusual street, very commercial. In fact, it's the most commercial street we've ever worked on. So crazy that this right here, the Zanzibar, if any of you are from Toronto, you will know that this is the most famous strip club in all of Canada. So it's the first time we had a strip club next to our site. And actually, you know what? At first I thought, a strip club, what does that mean? Who cares? And we didn't really think about it. But just like the muskox problem, this came back to haunt us. So I'll tell you a funny little story before I show you the project. You'll see in a moment that the building is quite large, a glass structure with lots of views and lots of daylight. It's wonderful to be inside. The light comes in and everything. But right next to it, because the site, this is before it was built, this is the site here. It overlooks the rooftop of the Zanzibar Strip Club. Well, the women that dance there for privacy go to the roof to relax. It's the only private time they have. So they started looking up and realized after we built the building that there were all these students gawking at them. And they got really upset. And they actually sued the university for invasion of their privacy. And they won, which is just fantastic, I think. And so they had to get a little privacy terrace built for them up on top of their strip club. So, that's one of those things that isn't on the list either, like, muskox attacks and strip club privacy issues. You always got to think about everything. This is the existing library. It was built in the 70s. You can see why people hate architects. I'm sure that this building looked really great in drawings. Like, this was made before computers, and it was probably drawn by pencil. I used to draw, I still draw like that. Every little brick had that perfect little graphite mark on it. It was probably just gorgeous. And this is what it actually comes out like. All these windows, these are the windows, and they're actually up at 7 feet high. So when you're in the building, there's no way to actually see out, except for those little strips that occur in only 2 locations on every floor. So we had to rethink this whole thing. And actually, the strip club and all the crazy life on the street was much more interesting than this academic building made for a library. So we wanted to try and deal with that. The first thing we realized was that there's the Zanzibar here. We needed to include retail in the design. So we didn't want to make the library go all the way to the street. We wanted the street to feel commercial. But how do you make that without having this problem of walking through a Starbucks or something to get to the library? So we lifted up the ground, like the Oslo Opera in a way, and tucked the retail in underneath it. And once we lifted it up, it allowed us to create this plaza, which faced south. And, in Canada, sunlight's a big deal. So if you can get sunlight, you have to make space for it. So we ramped the surfaces to catch as much sunlight as possible and shaped the building to bring daylight down onto that plaza so that people would interact there, as well as create a new retail solution and a new entrance to the library. This is our first concept sketches, one of the first. I put this in because a lot of architecture students do really crazy things. And there's nothing wrong with doing something crazy, but you have to know where it is that you're going to jump off the cliff and where you got to step back. So I show this because I'll compare it to the final building. You'll see much of the same characteristics of this sketch, but nowhere near as crazy or radical as this, because I don't think this would have worked well, actually, in real life. So here you can see the building in one of the renderings. It's a fritted glass with this new plaza and this blue chip that kind of rises up from the ground. So you can still see that quality of this plaza and this blue thing lifting up over your head. Those blue chips that you see are actually aluminum panels painted with iridescent paint. I'll show them to you in a moment in more detail. But they reflect light in different ways down onto this new plaza, which is extremely popular, especially on a sunny day. So everyone comes there to bask in the sunlight. And the blue chips actually change the color of the sunlight. So it goes from being yellow to a slightly cooler blue light over people's heads. We chose this blue. It was really funny because the original idea was, well, if you were a Canadian and it was winter, where's the one place you'd probably want to be other than standing in the snow waiting for a bus? And we all agreed it would be the Caribbean. So we went in and looked at pictures of the Caribbean, and found these blues of the ocean and of the sea. And so we made this kind of Caribbean blue. And most people don't know that, but I think they kind of feel it. When you look up, it changes. Every panel is identical, so none of them are different. They're all exactly identical. But because of the way in which they're folded and your angle of incidence of the reflection, it makes them all look sort of unique and different. And what's great is when you see people crossing the street. Today, of course, everybody's got their nose in their phones. So like people are like texting away, and they'll get to this crosswalk and they'll stop, wait for the light, and then they'll look up, and then they'll see this thing and they'll go, whoa, what's that? And it'll last for about 10 seconds, and then they'll go back to texting or whatever. But for that 10 seconds, they had some understanding that there was a real world around them, and it wasn't all like texting and virtual. And so there's like a little mini victory. Here's how the panels were made. They're actually a single sheet of aluminum, which was scored with a CNC robotic device on the back side. They were painted with a kind of car paint, like an iridescent blue, so that it's all one color, but depending on the angle of light, different. And then they were folded by hand. So every single one of these panels was scored by a robot and then folded by hand. So it's like an origami building and then put into place. So this is a picture I took just using my little phone on selfie mode, straight up, so it's not a very good picture, but you can see the change in quality of color and light. And the next thing I'm going to show you is a little short film. This was taken one evening. I was there, and because it's commercial and there's a strip club and everything, the lights are like all crazy all over the place, and there are big LED billboards with Calvin Klein underwear on them, and all that light is just everywhere. And so these surfaces collect all that light and send it back out into the world. So there's no electricity required to get that kind of an effect. It's rather interesting to see at night. The chips come into the building and form the roof of the lobby, which is adjoining a set of stairs that lead you up into the library itself. There's a little coffee shop there, a wonderful little coffee shop here. One of the things that's amazing about this is that's actually a Starbucks. And we negotiated with Starbucks to take all their branding off their coffee shop. Because we said, if you're going to be in this building, people are going to buy your coffee no matter what. You don't need to have a green mermaid. It'll all work out fine. And they agreed. So this is the only Starbucks probably in the world that doesn't have a green mermaid on it. And it works very well, and they're very happy, and they sell a lot of coffee. It actually reminds me of a little story, if you don't mind, I'll share with you. When we made the Hunt Library in North Carolina, the librarian wanted a table when you walked in which had all the technology available so that if you didn't know how to use a digital camera or a 3D printer, you could walk in, all the technology would be there, a support person would come to you and show you how to use it. And it was very clean and minimal, and the librarian said, it really looks like an Apple store. Can we call it the Apple Store? And I said to her, well, probably there's some legal issues here. You better not call it the Apple Store. But she was adamant. She's calling, so she wrote Apple Store on it. And of course, within a week, she started getting cease and desist letters from Apple's lawyers. You can't call this an Apple Store. You don't sell Apple products, etc. And so what she did, because she was a genius, she went out into the North Carolina landscape and found a family whose last name was Apple, and got them to donate money to this thing so she could write their name on it. So it said the Apple Store. And so it was legal. That was a good one. The building is quite unusual in that it's a vertical library, and we decided we would make each floor of the building unique, something special, so that when you got off the stair or off the elevator, you'd walk into this place, and every floor would be something incredible and exciting and dynamic. And we wanted it all to relate to the natural condition, to the landscape, to the places that you don't often get to see if you live in an urban condition. So we have the floors that are called the sun and the beach and the forest. And each of these floors are so radically different, I'll show them to you in a minute, that in fact in one of the elevators, they just took the numbers off. Normally you'd get in an elevator and say, I'm going to the 4th floor. And this is the panel. It just says, I'm going to the garden. Or somebody says, I'll meet you at the beach. And actually, that works just fine. You don't actually need the numbers. And so everybody connects to each floor in a very special way, and it's not related to an abstraction like a number. So, for example, this is the bluff level. When you get off, there's this amazing foam thing that just rises up off the floor and goes right up to the ceiling. It's super soft, and it's meant to be a chair. And when we opened the building, it started to get populated. So on the bluff, you can climb this bluff and sit on it in all kinds of ways. Oh, here's another funny story. When we built this, the life safety inspector came in and said, what the hell's that? It needs a handrail around it. 36 inches. And he made us was ready to make us put in a handrail. It was like we had to design everything. We were ready to give up, like, you can't. So then we finally told him, hey, wait a minute. You know what it is? It's actually a chair. It's not like a piece of architecture. It's a chair. It's just a really big and strange chair. And in fact, many chairs the butt is about 20 inches off the floor, right? So if you were to stand on a chair, you'd be breaking the regulations because you'd be over 18 inches off the ground, and you don't need a handrail around every single chair. So once we convinced him it was a chair, he said okay, and we didn't have to put the handrail around it. That was pretty interesting. This is the floor called the garden. So when you walk off the lift, it's beautiful green. It's all very bright. This is actually the floor for people who have learning disabilities. Some of them have economic challenges and can't meet their payments for their tuition. So we wanted the floor to feel content. And one of the things that you'll notice about it is this very weird green glass that as you approach the offices where you would have a meeting or have some common classrooms, you'd say to yourself, why the hell would I want to go in there? It's like green and scary. Like I'd look like a piece of cheese if I walked into this room. But actually, this is just green film, and it's on the glass. And so as long as the light is on inside the room, the light will be stronger inside than outside. So the energy of light transfers through the glass, and it makes it look green on the outside. But if you step inside with the lights on, it's absolutely normal. So here's a woman cleaning the room, and this is a picture taken at exactly the same time when I stepped inside the room. So on the outside, it looks like this, and on the inside, it looks just absolutely normal. And I've seen people walk up to the doors and kind of reluctantly walk in and like look inside, and then they step back outside, and like, how is this happening? It's a kind of an interesting challenge, and I think, giving people challenges is important too. The opposite effect occurs on one of the other floors called the sun. So on the sun floor, it's this beautiful warm red, and it looks like everyone's boiling alive inside. And you'd think, well, God, I can't go in there. I'm going to, cook like a lobster. And what happens here is, again, it's normal on the inside. But at night, when the classrooms are not being used and you turn the lights off, then, of course, light goes the other way, and the room is filled with red lights. So the students like to go up there at night, turn the lights off, and just hang out in this red room. And they just bask in this kind of fake sunlight. And it's really funny to see. Another floor called the beach. The beach has no traditional chairs or tables, so you sit on the floor or bean bags or other kind of strange things. It's a series of maple terraces that come down to a blue carpet that looks like a lake or an ocean, and the lights are like the sun in big circles. People love to go into this space. It's really boisterous, very loud. And in fact, it's so much going on in that room that like on Thursday nights you can go there. They have a breakdancing club that shows up in the library. It's amazing. And I remember when we did this room, the librarian said to us, I want a floor where anything can happen. And now in retrospect, I always tell my clients, be careful what you ask for, because anything happens here, and they're having problems with, like similar to the on the roof of the opera. There's all kinds of things happening in the corner they can't control. But most funny, I think, is students show up with bathing suits on and beach towels and bring beach balls, and they hang out at the beach in the evening. And so they're trying to get that under control. The breakdancing is another thing that they've now limited it to one night a week. At the top floor is a floor called the sky, and it's exactly the opposite. It's quiet. It's peaceful. You have this soft light everywhere around you, and it's dappled light coming in through the glass. So it's like being under a tree when the sunlight hits your face. And it's exactly the opposite of the beach, dead silent. And you don't need any people to tell you to be quiet. If you make a noise, the students will tell you to shut up. So it's self-policing, because they have their own space where they can be loud, and they have a space where they can be quiet. And they move back and forth between these two worlds, and it makes for an interesting place to study. We've been doing a lot of research. We've gone back after about a year. We did some interviews. I like this one. I do some breakdancing and then go back to studying. It's become a very most popular building on campus now. And in fact, the other UT, which is University of Toronto, also comes there and studies now, even though it's Ryerson University. It was mentioned that we just completed the reconstruction of Times Square, so we've been working on this project for about 8 years. Everybody knows Times Square. It's one of the great icons of American life. It's the intersection of two streets, Broadway and 7th Avenue, and it's traditionally been a traffic jam and a hellacious crowd of people who are from mass tourism on buses getting off and freaking out like this. And if you're a New Yorker, you can't get through, and you're so upset at all the people from, Nebraska. I hate people from Nebraska. And stuff like that. So one of the things that we did was we put up a camera, and we started to watch density levels across Times Square. This map was created. It's called a population volume map. And so if you look here, it might be a little hard to read, but wherever there's green, that means there's not a lot of density, and wherever it's red, density is heavy. You can see there's almost no green, a tiny little bit up here. And we used to call this map the pissed off map, because everywhere it's red is where people are angry. And so our job was to make all of this red and change it into green, if that was possible. So we worked with the city, and we permanently removed automobiles and all vehicular traffic from Broadway running north-south and replaced them with pedestrian plazas. So the cars only run on 7th Avenue, and we made all of these pedestrian plazas more useful for large groups of people in different ways. So it just opened. Here's some of the images of the project now that it's complete. All of these spaces are new, and they didn't exist before. It's funny, I was just out there for the opening, and I was standing here, and one of the newspaper reporters said to me, "So, what do you consider a success of this project?" And I said, "Basically, because we're not getting hit by a truck right now." That's a good thing. We've done a lot of on-site analysis, so we spent hours and weeks and days just watching people. This USA Today stand was used in 30 different ways in 1 hour. I mean, people put their coffee on it. They had meetings. They used it for photographs. It was incredible to watch. Students prior to the project were sitting on the streets. It was terribly unhealthy and dangerous. We also created these kind of little light pucks that are embedded in the pavement so that they capture the light. They're all stainless steel. They capture the light from the marquees as you move along. And they're also like the old film noir movie house marquees that many people think of when they think about Times Square. So here you can see some of these in place. One of our ideas was very counterintuitive. We said to them, we don't want to use any electricity in Times Square. You got more than enough electricity. You don't need any more. So we're going to use no electricity on the ground plane. Everything we do is just going to be reflective or deal with the light that exists. And everybody couldn't believe it. They were like, this is Times Square. You have to make flashing LEDs and everything. But it needed a sense of balance. And so we provided that balance with these reflectors. They become very popular, and I've seen them now in a couple of TV shows. They reckon them. And then this woman sent us this Instagram picture. She was very excited that her boots matched the new paving stones. There are about 350 events a year, all the way from group yoga to rodeos that occur on Times Square. In the past, everything related to an event had to be dragged in using a generator and cables, and now we've created some benches, big benches, 50 feet long, 5 feet wide, and inside of them are embedded all the fiber optic cables, all the acoustic sound system needs, electrical power, everything you need to put on a performance, so they don't have to drag stuff across Times Square anymore. So theoretically, Times Square is now officially wired. And you can sit on these benches in different ways, lay on them in different ways. I like to watch people on the benches because they higher at one end and lower at another. And of course, in dense circumstances, people sit anywhere, even if they have to climb to get up onto it. So I notice when people sit down on this end, they're very serious and adult-like because their feet are firmly on the ground. And when people sit on this end, when their feet are up in the air, they're like children. They move their feet back and forth like kids in a high chair, and they act a little more youthful. They're very, very comfortable on your butt. So we said, design everything to make your butt happy, because if your butt's happy, you're going to be real happy too. And so there's these soft edges that allow people to sit in different ways, the different heights of backrests. Sometimes people don't even sit on them. They just stand on them. And we've done some analysis here. The analysis is amazing. If you look at these figures, we've created and nearly doubled the amount of state and tax revenue just by providing public space in Times Square. There's enough tax revenue from Times Square pedestrianization to pay for 7 times the Parks and Recreation budget per year in New York City, or half the police department budget. And the New York City Police Department is the largest standing militia in the country outside of the Army and the National Guard. So enormous amount of money comes here. We've reduced crime rates. We've reduced pollution levels. We've increased use of the area by pedestrians. So it's been generally so far a success. While we were working on that project, we expanded the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, which is a Mario Botta building that you can't see here on the other side of our project in the central part of San Francisco. Fairly substantial project. Once completed, it made the San Francisco MoMA actually larger in gallery space than the New York MoMA, so it's now among the largest modern art museums in the world. It was located just behind the Botta building, which is here, if any of you have been there, in an area that was previously considered an alleyway. It's trash collection and so on. The Botta building responded to these big roadways, and we wanted our building to respond to these little alleys, which had been blocked off and forgotten about for years. Nobody even knew they existed, but we wanted them to become the core of our design. So you can see here, we had to relate, though, to Botta in a particular way. This is before our expansion, and here's after. You can see that the building sort of terraces up and actually links this Art Deco building to the postmodern structure in the foreground. So there's some idea that all the buildings are welcome at the party. And we also recognized that there was a new transit terminal happening nearby to the south that would make these alleyways more exciting. Here's a picture of one of the alleys before our project was complete. Beautiful little Victorian structures that are more or less just abandoned and not used anymore. We made the building more porous, added 3 new entries. The original entry was only in one location on 3rd Street. We formed the building like Ryerson to allow sunlight down into the areas that would be where people would collect, and we lifted the building off the ground. We didn't make a straight building. We made a curved building so that as you looked between it and the surrounding buildings, your eye would be led deep, deep into the heart of the block. And so this is one of the earlier sketches with this sort of pregnant-like shape that's raised off the ground. And here you can see it when it was completed from a nearby condominium tower. The building, as you approach it from some of the main boulevards, rises up almost like a cliff. You feel there's this cliff-like shape has entered into the heart of San Francisco. I like to take pictures of our buildings from weird locations, so a lot of these are my pictures. I don't take the ones that just show the whole building. I walk around and I find myself in a weird spot and I look up and I see the building, and I like to take images of that because that's how people see buildings, through the fire escapes or in the weird alleyways. And at night sometimes they look very different. This is one of the alleys nearby where the building is located towards the back of this small alley, and it rises up in a rather exciting way. Here it's sort of peeking in between things. Sometimes our friends send me things, like my friend sent me this picture. He said, "Hey, I'm in the Colombian Embassy in San Francisco, and I looked out the window and saw your building." And there it is. And then one time I had this amazing opportunity. A friend of mine installed the Bay Bridge lights in San Francisco on the Oakland Bay Bridge, and he said I could go up and see these lights and see their installation. So I got to climb the catenary arch on the Oakland Bay Bridge. I actually climbed that baby, and I got all the way up to the top. It was fantastic, and I took a selfie, which is what you got to do when you get to high places. And so I took the picture, and then I got it home, and I thought, wow, wait a minute, I bet you can see the SF MoMA in there. So if you look really carefully, it's right there. I was like, yeah. One of the great things about it is that it's horizontal. So once again, like the New York Museum, commercial buildings have to be vertical. They're forced to build to the property line and go straight up in the air. A cultural building has the luxury of laying back on its back. So getting that kind of horizontality was an important issue, and you can really sense it here adjacent to the skyscrapers. There are new ways to come in if you enter from the new building or if you enter from the old, but they all meet in one location. This is the new entry, which is adjacent to a beautiful Richard Serra sculpture. There's now 40,000 square feet of free art space in this building. You don't have to pay money for, and that's as much area dedicated to art as was in the Bota building that you had to pay $20 to see. So once we did the expansion, we made more free art space. It's free of charge for children under 18 years of age, so young people get to see works of art. As you enter, you're able to rise up and look down into the Richard Serra piece, which is quite unique to have that perspective. If you enter from the Bota building, you see right through both Bota and the new expansion by us. So this is on the left, the way it used to be. This stair no longer met code, so we had to disassemble it. Also, we needed views into the new expansion in the back. So this stair now allows more light in and gives you a view back to a garden, which we've created at the furthest point in the building away from you. Once you go up those stairs, you're in a sort of art court. As you rise up, a very tiny little stair, only 13 feet. And that's the thing. To the left, if you look in this picture, these are the lines that they used for the elevators. So they anticipated everyone to take the elevators, and we said, no, believe me, they're not going to take the elevators. They're going to take the stairs. But they set these things up anyway. And now because the stair is so small, it's only 13 feet up, and in the context it looks tiny, everyone goes to the stair, and once they've made that first run, they're committed. They take all the rest of the stairs all the way up, so the elevators are hardly ever used. At the top of that stair, in one gallery with Calder's, you look out to the garden that we've created. This is nice because you have Calder outside and inside. And every time you open these doors, there's no vestibule. So when you open the door, the air comes in and it makes the Calder mobiles move, which is the way they were intended to be seen. That garden is quite unique, and it's a living garden. So as you look at it, you'll see there are different plants in different locations. There are over 25,000 plants on this wall. We designed all of them locations together with a botanist. So here's the planting plan for that wall. I love it. This is each type of plant is put in a location which gets the proper amount of sun or shade considering its typology. Over half the plants are from the San Francisco Bay Area, so they're native to its spot. And here's outside looking along that wall. It's become a very popular place for selfie pictures, of course. The stairs inside, once you get up the first little stair, are rather dramatic. They go way up into the building. They're inspired by some of the topography of San Francisco. Some of the fun stairs, like the Filbert Steps near the Embarcadero on the coastal areas of the city. At the top of every set of steps, there's a place to sit and rest. And sometimes you look at the garden, sometimes at the landscape around. There's the galleries are very, very simple. All of the light that you see here is artificial. The galleries in the United States won't allow natural light into the galleries. In Europe, they do. It's funny. In Europe, when I design a museum, and you just have a skylight, and you're in the room, and the clouds go by, and it gets a shadow, that everyone loves it. It's like, wow, a shadow, that's neat, it's moving. And here in the U.S., if a shadow goes by, it's like, oh my God, we got to get the shadow under control. Let's build baffles, and let's make, the shadows are like wiped out, engineered away. So unfortunately, we weren't able to move too far into the world we would like, but what we did do is that just on the other side of this wall are the only natural light windows. So there's those big seating window that you just saw with the garden. That's all natural light coming in. And it gets stopped by this wall. But what we did was inside these coves, we put all the ambient light inside the cove that's facing the same direction as if it was natural light coming from the same windows. So in other words, the artificial light directionality is the same as the natural light, and it makes you feel at least a little more comfortable. This was very hard to do. We had to design these sine wave shapes very carefully with engineers, and you can see the results here. They also use less can lights and less energy. This building uses 30% less energy than a museum of the same size anywhere else in the world. I like this picture. It's funny, I find that generally speaking, people with color go to colored things, and people with black and white go to black and white things. I don't know if that's true or not, but sometimes it is. It's so hard to see this. This is actually the toilet in one of the toilets. We've got these amazing toilets. And when you walk into them, it's just a boring white door that has like a picture of a woman or a man on it. And so people just kind of, how you do, you're just like, I'm tired, I'm going to go into the toilet. You open the door, and it's like this blast of color. And in this case, it's red. It's just extreme, and people kind of are taken aback. But they are the most heavily Instagrammed toilets anywhere in the world. So this is a woman, she's actually wearing a white dress, and it just looks red. And everything, you're just bathed in color. And it's led me to believe that if we could get everybody to spend 10 more minutes a day in the toilet, the world would be a better place. I'm sure of it. It connects us to our kind of real presence. Here's a view of the facade. It's inspired by the topography and the landscape. These are very high technology facade panels. There are 600 panels, and every one is unique. They're a sort of cementitious panel with a very high engineered sort of fiberglass material that it's sort of like making a surfboard. So it makes them very, very light. And what's amazing is that although all 600 panels are absolutely unique, it was cheaper to build a panel like this than to use a unitized repetitive system. This is the first time that we can say that in contemporary industrial life. And that's because the robot's involved. So a robot makes the shape out of foam. Here's the foam. And then the cementitious panel is pressed over the form that the robot made. And then that form is used to carry the actual panel to the site, to the construction site. The panel's lifted off, installed, and then the foam is brought back to the factory. And then it's dumped into a machine, which mixes it back to a new form, new mold. And then the robot comes and makes a new form. Robot doesn't care if it's the same as the last. It's the same to the robot, if it's different or the same. So actually, the cheaper the mold, the cheaper the construction. The more expensive the mold, which means you can do the same form multiple times without reconstituting it, costs more money. So amazing that all of these panels, every one is unique. They were all drawn out, and they were cheaper than like a metal system of one of these suppliers that you might see on display at a AIA convention somewhere. At night, they actually reflect the ambient light in a very beautiful way. We just opened this building. It's the caves at Lascaux in France, the ancient caves that were painted 20,000 years ago. I realize I've been talking a long time. Do you want me to stop? Or I can, it's only a little bit left. Okay. continue. We're almost near the end. This building is to recreate the presence of the great caves at Lascaux, painted by Neolithic peoples over 20,000 years ago. The original caves are nearby here, and our site is here. But these caves have become decaying because of human presence. So people coming in and out brought bacteria and humidity into these caves. They're so destabilized now that they're closed off permanently to human traffic. So nobody can go in. There's only a few people allowed in a year. And so as a result, the only way you can experience these beautiful caves is to go to a reconstruction. They've been working on the reconstruction for 50 years. And we've been working on this project for about 8. So we finally opened it a few weeks ago. The original idea is to sort of take the natural landscape and sort of slice it and then just gently lift up the landscape so that you arrive through these cuts in the ground. We wanted to make sure that everyone knew that they were not going to the real caves, because I can't tell you how many people have been to the other facsimile that they made in the 1970s, and I meet them and they say, I went to the original caves, it was amazing. I don't have the heart to tell them they were actually fake. Now we want people to know, when you go to these caves, you're seeing a facsimile. They're not the real ones, but you should have a great experience anyway. So the way it works is that as you approach, we built in the agrarian landscape, lifted up the ground, and you enter through this sort of arch, and then you take an elevator up to the top. The elevator lets you out outside, and you walk towards the trees, and the reconstructed caves are in the same angle and same sort of character as the original caves. And then you re-enter the building from the outside going into the caves. And then you walk through the caves, and then you exit again, and I'll show you what happens when you exit. Here's the building in the context of, this is a town called Montignac in Bordeaux, which is where Lascaux, this is the Lascaux Hill here, and there's our project. As you approach it along the sides, you can climb up over the top of it. It sort of peels up out of the ground and creates this sort of contemporary cave-like quality. And we don't have a lot of pictures of it because it was only 2 weeks ago that we opened it. But I think I snapped this picture, so the landscape still hasn't grown in yet. And at night, of course, in the evening, it starts to grow the presence of the interior lobbies to the exterior. And as you walk under this giant concrete form, you really feel the presence of the form of the building. And it's actually striated with different finishes and so on that were quite special. That's up on the back of it. You can walk up on the top and overlook the area. So after you've taken the elevator, you go outside, you come into this passage, which takes you along the edge of the cliffs. And once you go through that, you enter the cave. So there's a door that you have to walk through. And the cave itself is very unusual. This is a rendering. We made it an exact replica. We had to model it in every way. We used the most highest technology scanner to scan the original surface of the caves. The scan was so strong that the CNC devices couldn't actually use the information, so we had to dumb it down like 30-fold in order to make it. And then we had painters working on the surfaces of it. Each area is supported by a truss system that holds this new reconstructed cave in place. There are some amazing features about it that I like to tell people. One of them is that, of course, the original cave made 20,000 years ago does not meet ADA standards. So we had to make it wheelchair accessible. It meant we had to take the entire cave and lift it 3 degrees so it would be of the correct slope. And then in one area of the cave, it gets so narrow that a wheelchair wouldn't fit through. We needed to widen it. But you can't just widen a cave, right? So we had to actually take about 20 feet on either side and slowly, gently change the area, because, all the paintings on the surfaces, every painting is related to the contours of the cave. So you can't just push it out of the way 18 inches. So it took a lot of time to get that worked out. So this is the original shape, and that's the wheelchair accessible shape. And there you can see the original angle and then the wheelchair accessible angle. There were a team of 30 painters, 20 scientists, all working, as I say, for 50 years on this reconstruction. They're actually made out of the same materials, the same elements. They often painted in the same light conditions as the original painters. Sometimes they used high technology to scan, because some of the paintings are so complex that you couldn't possibly just look at a facsimile and paint it. They're too intense. No one knows how long it took to paint these paintings. It could have taken 10,000 years, thousands of people, or it could have been done by one crazy person in their lifetime. We'll never know. And here's, once you enter, this is the actual cave, and they're just stunning. I really can't tell you how amazing these paintings are and that people so long ago made them. Each piece is beautifully integrated into the surface of the walls. They were deep, deep, deep in the earth. They had only for light animal fat. The reason we know, and we actually lit these in the way that they were lit when they were made, because they took animal fat into the caves and they poured it into little divots in the rock and put a little wick in there made of grass, and that's how they got their light. And so we recreated those positions. Here's some of the detail of this thing that's inside of our building. It's pretty special. And if you just look how perfect the nuances are of each of these pieces. And this was done with manganese, just chalk on the wall and things. And so once you go through that cave, you enter out into this space, back into the light. Then you walk through again, back into the building. So you know that you're finished with that. And we actually have a big vestibule. And once you move through that vestibule, there's a number of educational things. But most importantly is we actually made 2 caves. So one cave is completely reconstructed. You walk through it. Nobody tells you much. You just go, wow, this is unbelievable. And then when you go into the museum, we made another whole cave. And we deconstructed and pulled it all apart. And that's where you learn the history and the art of the cave painters themselves. So here you can see how we've suspended these caves over the viewing area, and they're all suspended by cables which go way up into a skylight. So that's actually natural light there, and the cable structures themselves are hanging almost from the sunlight down onto these structures, and then we have very little light down at the bottom, so they almost disappear, and that's really actually the way it looks. There's also a big kind of three-dimensional crazy world where you can learn about influences of cave art. There's a lot of other projects we have. We're doing a couple of libraries. This is our biggest project. You'll probably hear about it next year. It's a $1.2 billion cultural center in Saudi Arabia. There's a library in Philadelphia, a couple of libraries. We just made this little treehouse hotel. You might have seen it in the news. It's a hotel in Sweden where every architect gives an area to make a little treehouse. So we made this treehouse hotel so you can sign into the hotel and you get to stay in this thing overnight. And you go up there, and what we did was we went onto the site before we made our project. We looked up into the sky where all these trees were, and we took a photograph of the site of the sky before our building was built, and then we printed it on the bottom side of the building so that now when you stand under it and look up, you see what it used to look like before we made our building. And there's a little net, so inside the hotel, you can step outside on this net and hang out around the tree trunk as it penetrates directly through the building. And there you can see the little net. So those doors slide open and you can walk around on this thing and actually hang out in the trees, which is pretty cool. The last few things I'll show you. I only have 2 things left. We just opened a project in South Africa for Desmond Tutu. Archbishop Desmond Tutu is sometimes referred to as the Arch. And he's an amazing guy. He's still alive, and he's got the most amazing sense of humor. And we were asked to make a commemorative work for his life and the work of his importance to the Constitution of South Africa, which is under strain today, as many constitutions are around the world. The site is located just near the Houses of Parliament, and it's a walkway where people often move through Cape Town. And that's what it sort of looks like today. There's the Archbishop's original archdiocese on the right and the House of Parliament on the left, and a couple of people selling peanuts on the street. We've created an arch that is made of wood, and it has 14 strands of wood, and the 14 strands of wood represent the 14 sentences in the preamble of their Constitution and the 14 chapters that represent the Constitution text and body. And they're all strung together in this kind of basket weave, so they're all self-supporting. They don't really need a structure to hold them in place because they're kind of like a basket. We made a mock-up, so it's about a 1/3 scale mock-up, and we actually built the mock-up on a stage in Cape Town, South Africa, about a month ago, and opened it to Desmond Tutu. And he made his first public appearance in 2 years. He's been fighting cancer, so he's very near death. And there he is there. And we made this mock-up as we're now building the real thing. And it was great. So when he saw it first, he looked at it, and he has his cane. He's very weak. What do you think? You know, it's this abstract thing. And he goes, it's really great, but I think you have to work harder to get my nose right. That was good. So we had about 59 choir. We had a choir of 60 roughly there to open it. It was a great event. Have any of you ever seen this? It's a little doll's house we made. We actually made a doll's house for kids to play with. generally young girls, but also young boys. The idea was to get young people to understand the value of design. So in this doll's house, you reach into this opening and you pull it apart. And once you pull it apart, the top floor opens differently than the bottom. But once you open it, there's this whole world in there we designed everything. We designed the wallpaper, but we bought some of the doll's house furniture from a doll's house supplier, but not everything, because we wanted the child to also have their own doll's house furniture. And that it didn't, everybody worked on it in the whole office. It was amazing. And it didn't all work out. So like you can see, the staircase didn't actually touch the ground. That was an error in our drawings, stuff like that. There was this amazing tree. When you opened it, the tree sort of just appeared in the living room of the house. There's the tree that would suddenly appear in the main room. This is the vanity for the little dolls. The front door and the back door, we designed all this stuff. We even designed a little mouse door, and there's a mouse trap and a little mouse right there. It was fantastic to work on. There's the mouse opening. Everybody worked on it, and what I found was that architects lose sight of what reality is so easily. And when you were working on this thing, you were actually building the real thing. And so everyone just committed so heavily to it. I often say this is our most expensive per square foot project. It's about $10,000 a square foot because it's only like 3 square feet. So it was great to see. I'm going to stop with the last image. We won a competition about 3 years ago to redesign the national currency of Norway. It was in print, and now it's being distributed next month. So when you go to Norway, you'll start to see some of this money. It was a really unusual thing to win. It was part of our graphic design work. What we designed was a set of money that is a horizon of different views of the landscape across water and different wind conditions. So the higher the value of the money, the more wind. The more wind, the harder it is to see what you're looking at. So lower here. So the great thing about this is that you could take all this very unusual looking stuff that's almost like artwork. You could cut it up and you could glue it all together, and you would get a work of art that was exactly equal to the amount of money you just cut up to make your work of art. And so we can all give the art to the masses. Everybody has that possibility because money doesn't have a lot of value anymore. At least it has a value in terms of its aesthetic properties. So thank you very much for sitting so long and listening to me. I don't know, maybe the lights come up or something. About fish boils, or anybody want to ask a couple of quick questions, 1 or 2 before we leave, like where's the toilet, where's the beer, can I get out of here, stuff like that. Anything real quick? Not used to Knoxville asking questions. All right, well, I guess that's it. Thanks a lot, and have a great day, and maybe I'll see you all later. Great. See you soon.